Welcome back to Smart Life. Your calls and letters coming up soon. We want to hear from you. Call the show, 888-650-8176, 888-650-8176, or email your comments and questions by going to moneybizlife.com. Click on the Ask Dr. Gina button or on the Smart Life page right there, or you can contact us via Facebook or Twitter, and a lot of folks are doing that today, and I'm going to get to your comments coming up. All of those links can be found at moneybizlife.com, but right now, I want to ask the question, when is it okay to cry in front of your children? Some say it's damaging to a child's emotional development. Some say that it undermines a parent's ability to discipline their children when they show that kind of weakness. So here to discuss, our parenting expert and family counselor, Mark Spurlock. Mark, welcome back to Smart Life.
Well, thank you, Gina.
I am concerned about crying in front of my kids, and I think that parents should be careful. You know, as a child growing up with a single mother, pardon me, I can tell you that there were times where, you know, she would cry and it would make me feel very fearful of the situation, not fully understanding it. There was no real direction book for how to deal with divorce and stuff when I was little. There's a lot more out there now. But help people know, what is that balance? Because I know that the opposite isn't true, that you should never cry in front of your kids. So help us there.
Well, it's a good question, Gina. You know, and I think what you're talking about, it's a very important concept of whether or not you should cry in distress in front of your children, because they're really two different emotional states. We can cry in joy, we can cry in love, we can cry in happiness, and you know, and that is an act of courage in those particular states, to be that emotionally vulnerable.
That's so good, Mark. My husband's so relieved right now.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Because he cries. Oh, he cries at
Yeah.
the sentimental moments.
I'm
yes.
a crier too,
and it makes me love him all the more. But I've always kind of wondered, what's going on in my little boys' heads while that's going on?
No. What that shows is I have a big heart, okay, and that I can love, and that I'm approachable, and it's a human experience. Now, what we want to be careful is crying in distress, especially in front of younger children, pre-elementary, elementary school-age children. If you're crying in distress, what you're really saying is things are bad. And oftentimes kids have what we call these sort of innate emotional sensors that are really in tune with their parent, okay? Because a kid, take a young child who may not know what's going on in the world, but they're tuned into the emotions of their caregiver, and they can say, oh, things are very good or things are bad based on their emotional state. Now, so what we're really talking about are emotional management strategies, and I would say that, yes, you want to have good emotional management strategies, especially with younger children.
And isn't it important, too, to just kind of be in such communication with your children to such a degree that you know what they can handle? And because I really, I did have this episode with my son, Bo, where I just had a really long day. It was really hard, and I was really tired of my husband being in another state, and I just kind of came home after work, and I was on the sofa, and he just saw the tears, and he's like, "What's wrong, Mommy?" And I'm like, "You know what, I just miss your daddy." And that was, maybe you'd call that distress. Well, so what distinguishes that? Because it was a great bonding moment for he and I.
I think so.
Because he was feeling it too.
I think so. I think so.
And his world was weird, and I think he wanted to know that it felt weird to me too.
Well, again, I think that in those emotional experiences, those are precursors to emotional bonding, okay? And so when we bond, oftentimes it's with those strong emotions and stuff like that. And so it was probably a very bonding moment for your child.
It was,
Yeah.
And it gave him a chance to practice being that little man.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in him since then, and I can tell that it does sort of drive up, I believe, his confidence and his ability to be that protector from time to time.
I think that's okay. What we want to avoid is if you're crying because of some financial pain, all these sort of things, and now beyond whatever's going on, the stress, now we're dealing with a parent who's out of control because of that they've lost their emotional management, basically. So those are the key factors.
But
there.
we can't always control it, though, Mark.
No,
my mom going through her divorce, it was very tumultuous, and I remember her crying in front of me. And I'm just curious, what do you do if you just find yourself? Oops, you're in the car. You just came back from the court. It was a horrible experience. Now you're crying in front of your kid. Now what do you say?
Well, sometimes those moments are okay too. I remember my grandfather, who was a coal miner and farmer in Kentucky, for instance. When I saw him cry twice. One was when
And
he
we
lost
always
his...
remember how many times our
Yes.
grandfathers and our fathers cried.
Yes,
We're going to
yes,
get to that.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, he cried when my uncle died in the mid-'80s. Okay, he had a heart attack and he lost his son. You know, and it was a very vulnerable moment for him. And I also saw when he lost his wife, he was married 75 years.
Oh,
okay?
wow.
You know, and for a week he would go to the hospital and mourn and cry openly over her when she was at the hospital bed. You know, and I have to tell you, that was one of the most beautiful experiences I ever saw. You know, it's for him to be in that. But those were really personal. You know, you kind of give people the okay for those kind of key events, everything like that.
Upsetting, but it taught you that there was that kind of love after 75 years.
Yeah, and it helped me model myself
amazing.
as a man,
That's
quite
amazing.
honestly.
I love that, yeah.
And then, but going back to your question, if you really need to cry, and sometimes we can't control those things, then talk to a friend, okay, first, or talk to...
But what if you find yourself, you are
then
crying
it's okay.
in front of your kid?
You know, you want to have some emotional...
You don't want to really tell them why. Because I mean, I know people find themselves in this situation all the time. You're in the car with a child and you hear something on the radio or a song or something and you're going through a rough time and there you are and you're crying and they say, "What's wrong, Mommy?"
Yeah.
And you really don't want to tell them what's wrong.
Well, then I would say that you probably need to get a hold of it on some level, okay? Because, you know, ultimately we can't determine whether or not we're going to walk into a hurricane. The only thing that we can do is to model how we're going to respond to certain situations. So, you know, if it happens a little bit, I'm sure it's fine, you know, because we're human. We're all going to have good days. We're going to have bad days. But the reality is, one, you know, do the best you can, you know, especially young children. That's what I'm really focused on, because they're so connected with their state of being, you know, in regards to how you're doing. But, you know, we're also human, and give yourself some grace, you know, and, you know, we're not going to do it right, because these emotions are very complicated things. People think, well, they're not in the line of logic.
Right.
They have a life of their own.
And life does happen.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So for the dad who is, on the one hand, maybe his own dad dies, and he's crying at the funeral.
Yeah.
Does that diminish him in the eyes of his child as far as a disciplinarian and an authority on things in life later?
No, absolutely not. Okay, what it does is says that men are also human, okay, and that we have a realm of emotional experience as well. Oftentimes men do have a difficult time expressing hurt and fear, okay, and so those two emotions are kind of cut off from us. So we tend to express frustration, which is an unmet expectation, or anger, or rage, or any of those kind of things. And so now we have a lot of men who have anger management issues, because that tends to be their emotional expression and stuff. So what you want to find is a healthy way to express hurt and a healthy way to express fear, and, you know, and be able to talk about that ahead of time. Now, if your young child is there, you know, what I would try to get to hold on the best that you can, you know, and try to moderate that. But if you need to talk to somebody, talk to a friend, talk to a therapist. If you're going through a really rough time,
don't vent on your kids.
Absolutely,
Never.
don't. Yeah, exactly. When they become the parents, see, that's what ends up happening. You know, especially see this happening a lot with single parents, for instance.
Yes.
You know, the young child becomes the co-leader in the family, and they can tend to be able to looking at, you know, their children to, you know, take care of their emotional needs. We're always a parent, even in a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you say to the parent who has over-emoted in front of their children? Maybe they went through a really bad time and they're feeling bad about it now because they realize they really did traumatize that child. Counseling in order? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. Just do some counseling. I think just being able to talk about it. Look, whenever we make a mistake with our child, we always have the ability to go back the next day and say, you know what, I didn't handle that the best way. You know, and so that gives us free realm to some degree. We have an editing tape to some degree to be able to say, you know what, I kind of blew that. I'm really sorry. Very, very powerful for a child to hear from their parent to say, I'm sorry, or hey, you know, I didn't handle that well. You know, this is how I should have handled it. And so now what I'm doing, I'm modeling good emotional management, and I'm responding to the world. I'm not reacting. What I call the 3 R's. We want to respond rather than react.
I like that. Respond rather than react. I think that's really important, and good tips for dealing with children. Now, when parents have a situation where they have many times dealt with their children's own emotions, and their children are then asking, you know, how much should I be crying? How often? What's a normal period of time that that we can tell children, hey, this is okay, this is normal to cry this much? Because I think children have trouble getting those things in their heads.
Well, every child's different. Okay, the reality is, some children are more sensitive, some are not so sensitive. And again, what we want to model is good emotional management to responding in certain situations. Okay, so just like the parent should respond in
it's talking. It's talking. We're out of time, but it's talking about it. It's
yes, having a
maintaining
conversation
that communication.
and redoing it. Yeah.
Mark, thank you so much.
You bet.
Your calls and letters coming up next. The number 888-650-8176, or you can go to Smart Life page at moneybizlife.com. Click the Ask Dr. Gina button and send us an email, or you can contact me on Facebook and Twitter, as many of you are doing right now. We'll be back in just a moment with more Smart Life. Stay with us.